Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So we will leave off at what we saw last time of Runinja's game. So we were talking about how this bishop was sort of oddly placed, right? It wasn't exactly doing much, it was sort of defending these two pawns. And so my bishops are starting to get active, right? One by one. So notice I'm starting to mobilize my pieces. So bishop g4 was the first instance where I said, maybe I want to take this. And then after knight e6, knight d4, I might be better off. So after knight e2, I sort of thought, okay, well, number one, do I have to retreat my rook, right? Could I just play rook d8, knight takes f4, pawn takes f4, rook e1, and then after something like, well, wouldn't even play rook e1 because knight takes d3, right? So let's say after something like, even if we didn't retreat, if we just played queen e7, is there an effect? Like after knight takes f4, pawn takes f4, rook takes, bishop takes, g takes, queen g5, and then king f1, knight e6, right? We have compensation, but did it improve our position? And when I look at this position, I kind of feel like maybe the rook is quite valuable. So I decided to keep the rook, moved it back to f6, after knight h2, bishop e6. Now, the idea of moving the rook back, you have to think, okay, where am I going? Am I going here? Am I going here? Right? Or am I just going all the way back? Those are just some candidate options. Then the second thing you have to think of is when you go here, what kind of moves is your opponent going to play, right? So the first thing I thought of was the idea rook f7, right? So after rook f7, what was I going to do? Well, I was thinking knight h2 to scare away the bishop. And then after something like bishop e6, I kind of thought, I don't know about this. I mean, maybe you could play, I actually kind of forgot my analysis, but I think after rook f7, I might have been thinking about knight g5. I don't know. And then after rook d7, was I thinking about f3? I don't know. But clearly f3 is a blunder because of something like bishop h6 and getting this knight, or just bishop h5 should be sufficient. After g4, could play bishop h6 or queen d8, and then it just sort of all works out. But that's hard to spot. I think that's what I was calculating. Knight g5, rook d7, f3, and then I kind of felt like the bishop sort of belonged on c8. I mean, if you didn't follow my logic, that's okay, because sometimes I just think about very random things, and more often than not, they don't get played. So rook f6, my idea is to go to d6, put the pressure on d8, and just keep going. So after knight h2, I play this move bishop e6. Now, keeping in mind that the bishop looks really good here, I could also technically play the move h5. And after knight takes g4, h takes g4, let's say like rook g3, right? I could play something like queen f7 and rook f8 to put pressure on this guy. That's one opportunity that I didn't quite see. So I could have also played bishop d7 because that way I could achieve my idea. So maybe that was a better move than bishop e6, which sort of prevented my rook from going there and just sort of made my rook feel useless. So maybe I should have retreated to f7. After rook g3, I played rook d8, rook f1. I played rook f7, swing my rook over. You notice that I should have just played rook f7 here. So I sort of wasted a move. But after f4, this gave me a chance, right? Number one, I saw that after knight takes f4, you have all these pieces in a diagonal. So what do? Play bishop e5, knight takes e6, queen takes e6, rook takes f7, bishop takes g3. And now, notice how in this position, there are so many things you could calculate. You could calculate rook takes f1 and knight takes e6. You could calculate bishop takes g3 and knight takes d8. So, multiple possibilities. How do you approach it? Well, you take them one step at a time. So, for example, you want to calculate the move bishop takes g3, right? Then you see that white plays knight takes d8, and after bishop takes h2, king takes h2, rook takes f1, bishop takes f1, queen takes d8. You notice that you're not up material, looks somewhat even, so you do not go for it. Now, after knight takes e6, then you look to the next option. Knight takes e6, rook takes f7, and then you have to think, do I want to play bishop takes g3? Do I want to take this rook? So the way you determine whether you take one thing or not depends on the way you calculate. So after bishop takes g3, what do you think white is going to do, right? It's usually your moves are going to be dependent on what your opponent has to offer. So in this moment, white might play queen c3 check, and after king g8, there's something like knight g4. So it's a bit complicated there. And after something like knight d4, right? Or after rook d4, white could play rook takes b7. So after knight d4, well, the rook could go back. And I guess this is okay, but do you like this sort of pin, right? So in your mind, you're going to picture some sort of pin, and then you're going to ask yourself, do I like my position? And if you don't, then you don't play it. So I didn't like it. So I went with queen takes e6. The idea is after rook takes f7. It's a very tactical sequence, but I play bishop takes g3. And here, after rook f3, bishop takes h2, king takes h2, queen d6, and after the move. So notice how white could have played e5 here to save this piece, right? After queen takes e5, king h1 to avoid the check, right? But in the game, queen d6, king g1, knight takes d3. We've got two defenders on it. You've got two attackers on it. That's not enough, which means we get an extra knight. After queen c3, we play queen d4, delivering with a check. So queen takes, rook takes, and you notice how with the material I smoothly convert this game. So a lot to take in, very big game. What was the lesson here? Well, I think this part was okay. E5 now. It kind of felt like, there wasn't much resistance to me playing e5. Usually there's got to be a level of resistance, and usually that involves playing e4 first, or just getting the rook out quicker to play e4 first, because sometimes the rook on the e file is going to keep an eye on this e5 push. So notice how I got to execute this e5 with a bit of ease. And after e4, this knight sort of dominated this bishop. And knowing this, I kind of felt like what's weird is maybe even the move knight a4 might be okay here, because you're trying to get rid of this very dominant knight, right? So that's one idea of improving the position. It's hard to see though, because you have to recognize that this is the good knight, this is the bad bishop, and to do that you have to understand the position. And it's not very easy to understand the position. Even for me, sometimes it's not easy to understand the position. So after a5, I close down the position, and notice how I start putting pressure. So in this position, I would say play queen c3, get the bishop back, and just roll with it. But we have to recognize how important this bishop is. Protects this pawn, but mainly it's very passive in its defense. So I would suggest queen c3, bishop c2, just try to secure it for the time being. That didn't happen in the game, and so after, let's see, well, this was way later in the game, but after this series of complex calculations, I ended up with a piece, and I pulled through it. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Do we have time? Yeah, I guess we have a little bit of time to record part of the next game. So, this is my third game against Runinja. Let us continue. Knight f3, d5. So, this is called the ready opening. The ready gets really boring. So, knight f3, b3, g3, bam, whatever. You do whatever you want, but it's like what I told you about the modern. It's like what I told you about the perk. They're slow going. You develop, you bring your forces out, but you don't do much other than that. You don't attack or anything. You sort of like slow grind it out. And so after b3, notice how I just bring my pieces, challenge the center a little bit. You see, like, I play a3. Why did I play a3? To prevent knight b4 and attacking the c2 pawn. So you see I'm slowly building my position. And here's one thing that's, to me, a little bit weird. Now, you play e6, right? But the next move you play g6. I see a few problems with that, but it's not major, I would say. One is that this bishop's here, right? If the bishop had some breathing room here, like it usually does, that would be good for the bishop. But here, think of it as like you're holding the bishop hostage. The bishop has really, it's very limited in where to go. And if it loses those two squares, well, it is trapped, and you don't want to do that. Secondly, you've developed your pawn to e6. The bishop does a role in protecting the c5 square. But then you play g6, and it's sort of, to me, it feels like a conflicting interest, right? You want to go this side, but you also think about going this side because of my bishop. Don't be intimidated. I would suggest you go this side, right? You go with rook ca, go with b6, you go with bishop e7, whatever you want. But leaving this side open, to me, it's somewhat of a red flag already. I'll continue my analysis in the next video, but stay tuned.